The day's your birthday. Come on, get happy. Is that how the song goes, right? Come on, get happy. Good morning, everybody, or good evening, or good night if you're watching this before bed. Thanks again for joining us. As you know, my name is Lawson, and this is Tattoo Critiques. This week we've got more artist tattoos to talk about, so join me on this journey as we tear these motherfuckers up. Don't forget to stick around to the very end of the video where we talk about my favorite tattoo and my least favorite tattoo of this week, or as we like to call it. So let's not waste any more time and just get right into it. First up, we have a tattoo sent in by Craig St. Peter. Craig St. Peter sent in this black and gray owl tattoo with very bold lines. It's the first thing I noticed about this thing is the line weight and how powerful and strong these lines are. So excellent work there. Another thing I noticed right away is a lot of the stippling, and it seems like you did this entire tattoo with a liner, which I love. However, I would like to see a little bit of contrast of shading in here. And what I mean by that is, I would like to see a little bit of softer shading in the background. You know, I love the stippling and the hard, bold lines, but up here underneath that little thorny part, I would like to maybe see just some softer shading, you know, where that current shading is, and a little bit on the outside as well. I think the juxtaposition of those two types of shading would look really good in this tattoo. I would also like to see some of that same shading brought down into the wings of the owl, maybe bring a little bit of black or something like that. Because to me, it kind of just feels like there's a little bit excess skin tone, right? I think you've got a little bit of room to play with some shades a little bit more and bring some of those blacks into that wing. But like I said, I do like the line weight overall. I love the big, strong, thick outlines that you have, as well as the thin, wispy lines that run through the wing and his little tuft on his chin. Things like that really pull this whole thing together. You've got very nice detail in the skull when it comes to like around the nose, the eyes, and the little cavities in the cheekbones, the teeth, the whole 9 yards. I think you've really nailed the skull and the owl. I just wish I would, you know, see a little bit of that softer shading brought throughout. You don't necessarily need any of that in the skull because the skulls are typically textured anyway. They're not really smooth, but I would like to see those shades in other places. Thank you, Craig. I appreciate you. Next up on deck, we have Dylan Jorgensen. Dylan sent in this cover up of a palm tree. I would call it a rework, but it kind of seems like he covered up the entire thing with an entirely new palm tree and in color this time. So it's like the same tattoo, but revamped. It's still got the seashell in there. It's still got the dad in there as well. Like I said, it's just bigger, revamped. Now it's color instead of black and white. But there are some crucial things that I want to talk about with this tattoo. The first thing that I see right away is the lack of black and line work throughout most of this tattoo. There is very minimal line work and hardly any black. It being a cover-up, I feel like we should see a decent amount of black to help mask those darker shades of black that are coming through. I would have liked to seen a nice bold outline around the entire trunk of this tree and also on the leaves themselves as well. I don't think the white is doing it justice here. I feel like you would have been better off with black outlines around the leaves and then maybe used a little bit of white for highlights. The background that we've got going on here is just a bit too muddy when it comes to that purple to the orange, and the blending really isn't that good, to be honest. Or you could push that purple down a little bit more, or use a transition color from purple to orange to really help sell that transition. It just stops too abruptly and is not super pleasing to the eye. That's not something that couldn't be fixed. Like I said, just kind of bring that purple down, or maybe even use a little bit of that darker orange to bring it up into the purple and help sell that blend a little bit more. The purple kind of just seems like it's meant to be there to help cover up those words in the back. I mean, and that's exactly what it's doing. It's very tough to tell up here in the top leaf if this is actually covering up that older palm tree or not. It does seem like it's catching a little bit of light, and the light may be reflecting off a little bit of that scar from the old tattoo. It's just hard to tell because that glare is there. It might be lack of black, or it might just be because that tattoo is scarred underneath. Could be a few options, so I'm not gonna kind of focus in on that. The lettering could also be a bit cleaner, especially when it comes to that last 5. And I think this may have been to do with placing on the stencil. The 5 might have got a little away from you when placing it down. I do realize that it's on a part of the body that has a lot of bending to it as well. So you just want to make sure when you're putting on these stencils that you put them on while they're standing as natural as possible, and when you take the photo that they're standing the exact same way, because you want this to read as clean and legible as possible. Kind of looks like a frog with a couple eyeballs and a wide open mouth. I would also like to see a little bit more line work throughout that trunk as well. Not just on the outside, but on the inside. You know, maybe bring those lines all the way through, add some darker brown shading on the bottoms of them. You know, let's give it some shape, let's give that trunk some character. Something else that you may want to try in the future, if a client has an opportunity to visit you more than one time, is to actually white out a tattoo pre-cover up. So if you were to take this entire tattoo and color white on top of the entire thing, let it heal for a month or so, and then come back and cover that up. You're gonna have a lot easier time with the cover up instead of trying to cover up dark grays and blacks. The white essentially washes away any of the solid blacks, leaving you with a very washed out gray. Like I said, making it easier on you in the long run. Overall, it's still essentially the same tattoo, just colored. I feel like you could have gone a few different ways with this tattoo. This maybe seems like it has more of a makeover rather than a redesign. Thank you, Dylan, for letting me talk about your tattoo. Next up, we have a couple tattoos sent in by Ibanez. You said you struggled with color and composition and you'd like to know how to kind of take your work to the next level. So I'm gonna do what I can to help you here. This turtle tattoo that you sent in seems like it's kind of ripped out from a comic book, which is really cool. I do like the composition that you have. However, I wish these photos were just a little staggered. And what I mean by that is there's this part on the back of the arm to where there's a solid line of skin that kind of comes all the way through. I would have liked to see it where those panels were just a little bit more staggered or offset. When it comes down to the actual coloring itself, I would maybe suggest something like this, doing almost like a comic book, filling everything in with solid blacks first, doing all your darker shades and things like that, and then putting your color on top of that. I think you'll get a lot more vibrancy out of the letters and those bright colors that you have throughout this tattoo. And I think everything would just have a lot more contrast overall. It would be nice to see a little more contrast even inside the lettering where it says Rocksteady and Bebop, maybe some darker shades, some darker reds or oranges, something like that on the inside of the lettering, just to give it some nice contrast from the bright reds on the outside as well. The purple sky behind Donatello's purple bandana doesn't really do Donatello any justice, because when you look at the backside of this arm where all the purples come together, it kind of just looks a little muddy. You also sent in this train tattoo from Chicago, the L train, which I think this thing's pretty badass. So it really seems like you excel in black and gray. This train, to me, looks fantastic. There are maybe a couple minor things here and there that you could use some work on, but overall this thing's bold, it's in your face, and like I said, the detail is great. It looks like a realistic train to me. I think the lettering where it says loop could be a hair cleaner, but lettering on things like this are very difficult, so I don't want to take away from that. I also think it might benefit you, and it kind of looks like you already did, to put some sort of outline around the outside of this train, but I feel like it's maybe just not bold enough. It seems like it was a light gray around the outside when it should have been maybe like a 3-round liner or something like that, just to make it pop out from the rest of those buildings. The buildings in the background are badass, but again, I feel like a little extra detail would help just elevate that to the next level. You know, maybe some deeper shadows in between the buildings and things like that would just really help set them apart. I think it would really benefit you in your color tattoos if you were to bring your strengths from your black and white tattoo over to your color tattoos. Use those bold blacks that you have in that train for the same thing in this color tattoo, and then put those colors on top of that black, and I think you'll really, like I said, just take your tattoos to the next level. So thank you, Ibanez. I appreciate you sending those in, and thank you for letting me talk about your work. Next up, we've got a little space dino from Matthew Chandler. Matthew, this tattoo's really dope. I like it. I like his little space ray. It's cute overall. The greens are nice and vivid, and I like the small little details that you've got throughout this thing. There's not a whole lot to talk about this thing. It's not that huge, and there's not a lot involved, but for what is there, I like, and it's pleasing to the eye. I guess if I had to add one thing, you could maybe add a little bit thicker line weight around the entire tattoo, maybe like a 9-liner or a 14-liner. Would just help make it a little extra bold. It doesn't need it, but it would be nice to see what it looks like with it. Excellent work, Matthew. Thank you for sending that in. Next up, we've got a David Bowie from Lance Levine. You sent in a few other tattoos that are pretty dope. Everything you've sent in was pretty cool, but we're gonna kind of focus in on this David Bowie. I like the design and the composition. There are a few things that I'm gonna touch on, and they are generally just smaller details, i.e. his glasses. The glasses are kind of a little bit weak, for lack of better words. I feel like you would benefit by having a nice 3-round liner around the entire frame, or just something to make it look like it's a finished pair of glasses. There are spots in the glasses where the white is kind of exposed and it looks like the frame just disappears. The same thing with the hair, the side of the face, the cigarette. I think you're just lacking small lines here and there to help sell the believability of it being David Bowie and it being a real photo. The lines at the top of the head, again, you're kind of just missing spaces that are help selling the believability. I really think that's one of your only downfalls in most of your tattoos that I'm looking at. It kind of seems like you're afraid to commit all the way and finish off these lines. You did a good job with that on the lightning bolt. Carry that through the portrait, even when it comes down to the nose and things like that. A little line can take you a long way. No jokes. It seems like on this one and a couple other your tattoos as well, the way that you end hair is just kind of adding a little bit of shading on top, but it's all seams rounded off. I think it would benefit you to give that some sort of shape or really fan it away from the hair and not just have that dark line around it. To circle back around, it seems like you've got a lot of great choices in composition and tattoo ideas and references as well. But it does, again, seem like you just need to finish off those lines and fully commit to those small details. Because again, that's what's gonna sell this being a realistic tattoo. Thank you, Lance. I appreciate it very much. This next one sent in is from Amy Dave. Amy, this is a very cool tattoo. Very well put together. I like this one a lot. These fine lines that you have running through this entire thing are very difficult to achieve, and it looks like you've done a great job. There's not very many striations or blowouts or anything like that. And even these tiny little dots that you have in here are very easy to blow out, and it doesn't seem like you really blew any of those out. So good job there. The idea behind this whole thing is pretty rad too. I like the moon phases that you have on top, and you know, the subtle little flowers that you have in there, and the whites that you have in there really shine. I don't think it's overdone. I do feel like on parts of the moon, they're really unnecessary, but the whites throughout the entire skeleton are spot on. I would like to see some of those lines that you have on the rib cage be brought down and put into that pelvic bone as well, just to make it seem like some of that is popping forward a little, you know. Maybe a little more white on those flowers would be cool to see, just to give it some nice contrast from the ribs and everything else. The one piece that I can kind of pick apart is that one giant circle behind the skeleton. It seems like if you were to continue the circle through the pelvic bone, it may just come off a bit flat. When it comes to these type of tattoos, geometry and things like that, where symmetry is key, things like that are pretty crucial. You know, those little things that you need to pay attention to, and most people probably won't notice, but if you send it in to somebody to critique, people like me are gonna pick apart. But again, overall, solid tattoo. Thank you so much, Amy, for sending that in. Very dope work. The next tattoo we have sent in is from Phillip Slick. Phillip, you sent in this Dimebag Darrell tribute piece with this skull and guitar and clock in the background. I like the design of this tattoo. However, I wish there was a little more detail, a little more shading and things like that, especially when it comes up to this clock. It kind of just feels like the clock up top was a bit rushed. These cracks kind of feel like they were a bit rushed. It doesn't sell the realism factor for me. And the flames don't quite look like flames. It kind of looks like whipped cream. I would also like to see some solid black in this tattoo, especially when it comes to like inside the mouth where you have the darkest shade of this. It doesn't seem like there's any solid black at all in this tattoo aside from the numbers up top. Bring some of that solid black in between those flames at the bottom, in between the teeth and mouth, and I feel like you'd really bring the contrast out in this tattoo a lot. You know, same with the eye sockets and things like that. Maybe just put some more depth in there. Maybe some heavier shadows behind the skull and on the clock and things like that would also benefit you more. I'm going to bring up your line work because I don't think it's the best. I think you would benefit from a thicker outline around the edge of this clock, maybe even the skull, if you're gonna add an outline, which you did. But what I wanna pick apart most is the quality of line work. It seems like you've got one thickness running throughout this entire thing that you used for the outline of the skull, the cracks, the clock, and the guitar. Varied up a little bit, you know, maybe throw in a 3-liner, maybe throw in a 14-liner, maybe something in between, and it'll really help your line weight and kind of give the appearance of the skull sitting in front of the clock. It would also just make this tattoo look a lot more bold and finished and complete. The guitar itself doesn't really quite feel like part of the tattoo. It kind of feels like an afterthought. Maybe you could bring that in to the other tattoo, you know, bring those flames around it or something else, bring that shading down. Just help it become a part of that tattoo as well. Thank you very much, Phillip, for sending that in, and let me talk about it. So that wraps it up for this week's critiques, but before we go, I want to make sure to talk about my favorite tattoo as well as my least favorite tattoo, or as I like to call it, the toilet tattoo. So my favorite tattoo this week was sent in from Amy Dave. Congratulations, Amy. I really like the entire structure that you have in this tattoo. The little bit of whites here and there. The composition overall is very cool. There are a few hiccups here and there, but overall, I like this tattoo in general. There's a lot of nice things to look at. Your eye travels throughout the entire piece. Good job. So congratulations, Amy. I appreciate you sending that in and being this week's winner. So this week's toilet tattoo was sent in by Dylan Jorgensen. So there are a few reasons that I picked this tattoo as this week's toilet tattoo. One would be lack of line weight, or lack of lines in general. Two would be the background. I'm not super pleased with the background on this tattoo. I feel like you could have done a few more things with it, you know, maybe give it some shape or something like that, but right now it kind of just feels like an orange blob that just goes through it to give that feel of a sunset. But to me, it's not really working that well, and I can't stop picturing this singing frog. So congrats, Dylan, on being this week's winner. Ish. So thanks again, everybody, for sticking around. Make sure you hit that notification bell, like, subscribe, share with your friends, and send in your tattoos to ponycritiques@gmail.com if you want to see them on a future episode. See you next time.